Hi everyone. What I wanted to do tonight was to give you an update as to how the book reviews are going and how the backlog of all of my books that I've read but haven't reviewed are actually paring down a bit, and to give you a review of a few books. We'll see how far I get tonight. It's already midnight, so I don't know how tired I'll get. I brought some help along with me though, so we'll see how that goes. As far as the update goes, I've already made the final cut as to which books I've already read and want to review, and which ones I've read but don't really care enough to talk about. So I think I have about 20 books left that I've read and want to post reviews of. Like I said, most of the ones that I've already posted reviews of are books that I read anywhere between a couple of months and a couple of years ago. So some I remembered a lot better than others, and as you can probably notice by the way that I read off of the screen, I rely heavily on a pre-written script for almost all of them, because I read so many of them quite a while ago. And I'll still write out scripts because I don't really think I could do this off the cuff. But as far as the review for tonight goes, it is a review of this book, Moral Purity and Persecution in History by Barrington Moore, Jr. I'm not going to have much to say about this. I wasn't terribly impressed by it, even though Barrington Moore is supposed to be a pretty well-known sociologist, a political sociologist. I was drawn to his name, I recognized it, so I picked it up. And, thin though it is, I mean, it's a really tiny book. It didn't have too much to say, I'm afraid. In the book, I think Moore's stated purpose is to kind of delineate some historical connections between ideas of moral purity and persecution or ostracization. But after a few minutes of thinking about it, it strikes me as difficult to think of many instances in which persecution, there were instances of persecution that didn't have roots in some kind of moral purity, or purity, moral or otherwise. And especially won't come as a surprise to anyone familiar with the wide swath of anthropological literature on the subject, like Mary Douglas's Purity in Danger. I haven't reviewed Purity in Danger, by the way, but I did review another book by Mary Douglas called How Institutions Think, which is a set of her Frank Abram lectures given in the 1980s, I believe. So if you're interested in that, just go to my channel, search How Institutions Think, and that should pop right up. Like I said, I bought this book thinking that it might have something new or interesting to say and how purity and persecution are linked. Mary Douglas certainly has a lot of interesting things to say about it, but I was wrong. In fact, he only mentions Mary Douglas's name one or two times in the entire book and doesn't really even discuss many of her ideas, even though she is probably the go-to scholar when you want to know about things like this. The book has at least two problems that I saw that should be considered pretty egregious shortcomings in a book of such sweeping history. Firstly, there's a paucity of examples from which he draws, and I think that's kind of problematic. He considers only, in chronological order, the literature of the Old Testament, the religious wars of the 16th century in France, the French Revolution, and what he calls the Asiatic civilizations. Secondly, he walks away from the book with the idea that, or the reader will walk away with from the book with the idea that the topologies of persecution, how cultures shame, in what circumstances that occurs, the shaming sociological function, etc., are never really explored. Like, you might think they would be in the title. There's nothing for the almost 2 millennia between the Old Testament and the France of the 16th century. And then there's the fact that the term Asiatic civilizations is so anachronistic to be almost risible. It sounds like something that came out of the 19th century. But then again, so is the picture in the back of the book showing him with a gigantic corncob pipe hanging out of his mouth. You have to see this, by the way. If you buy the book for any reason, it should be for this. Let's see if I can get that up there. Isn't that priceless? Isn't that just adorable? Okay. I know I shouldn't be making fun of the way people look, but I thought that was cute. The thesis of the book, in the first 3 instances that I listed above, is that persecution and concepts of moral purity are closely tied together, while in the Asiatic civilizations, as he calls them, and when he says that, he means mostly Confucian and Buddhist religious thought, that in the first 3 and not in the 4th, the connection is much more, in the Asiatic civilizations, the connection is much more tenuous between purity and persecution. And it might not even exist, actually. We're told simply in instance after instance that people were persecuted or driven out of different movements or societies, like the radicals in the Revolution, Jewish society of the Old Testament, etc., because they broke some sort of ethical or moral stricture. This almost reduces the entire book to a set of linear historical treatments, whereas I thought it would have brought in something more integrative and interdisciplinary. Instead, obviously it's the case that persecution is a form of trying to keep an idea or a culture or a cult or whatever else it is pure. That just seems like a sociological given, but he doesn't really go any further than that, doesn't take it anywhere else. And I thought that was kind of an amateurish observation for someone who's supposed to be such a sophisticated thinker. So unless you're for some reason asked to read this by a professor or something, I'd probably steer clear of this. Moral Purity and Persecution in History by the renowned sociologist Barrington Moore Jr.